so excited to have this conversation. You, I believe, were the first person who really reached out to me after I published my book to with so many questions and so many thoughts. The thing that's exciting me the most about this process is to be able to talk to people because conversation
Mhm.
and discussion is why we write.
Exactly. Mhm.
So you want to just say a little bit about yourself and then we can go ahead and get started.
Well, I was very fortunate to to run into you again after Goddard, and you edited a short story for me, several. And so when I got your book, I'm like, oh, okay. And it was just so engrossing. I mean, I couldn't put this one down.
That's
So
great.
I said, oh, I'm gonna have to really tell her how good this is. It's really good.
Thank you
And
so much. Yeah, it
yeah.
means the world to me, especially coming from another writer and another, woman of color. And so after that, then I got sent this incredible large group of questions, and I thought that's wonderful. And one of the things that's exciting me about this book launch is just to have wonderful conversations with people and to share that with other people who might,
Mhm.
I'm sure, have the same questions.
Well, the first thing that got me was the title, your title, and I wondered about why you chose that and whether it would be misconstrued, because of all the foolishness that's going on now politically,
Yes.
uh, calling people childish cat women and, all of that. So it might cause one to pause and say, well, exactly what does she mean mothering as legacy? So why
Yes.
don't you talk about that a little bit?
I would say it's really the opposite of that whole foolishness that you talked about earlier, because in that foolishness, there is one thing that people can be, and that's mothers, right? Like it's a mandate. It is
Mhm.
also a secondary add on to the important work of men, right? And
Mhm.
so for me, when I first started writing these essays for a website called Raising Mothers, which is dedicated to people of color, women, mothers. I really saw it as honoring and elevating and empowering the work that mothers do. We have the power to create legacy. We can either continue on the things that we learned that were healthy and beautiful in our lives, or we can change patterns of dysfunction, patterns of colonization. It was really about saying, no, we are powerful people and we can do powerful things.
Mhm.
Also, just understanding like we think of legacy again very male focused in many ways, and so for me it's saying here is this incredible, often invisible, always undervalued work that women do all the time, and
Mhm.
that it is the most important thing that we give not just our children but other, all children and the world. The subtitle about raising and being raised by my children is again, it's debunking the notion that we as parents know everything, right?
Mhm.
It's debunking the father knows best, and to
Mhm.
say no. Children are incredible beings that are, we're all born in the world with so much of a sense of what is possible, and then slowly it just become we get crammed into these boxes by
Mhm.
society. Being a mother is also about relearning and remembering the things that I lost along the way because I
Mhm.
was told that children were to be seen and not heard, right?
Mhm.
That they were always under the power of adults and that their
Mhm.
voice was always going to be secondary. And
Mhm.
I wanted to do it differently.
Mhm. Mhm. Okay, so you did it differently when you did, and that's the second question, is when you decided to have a non-traditional family, what were some of the issues that you considered or that you confronted?
Right. And so just for clarification, I became a parent with another woman who I was involved with at the time. And at the time, I also identified as a lesbian. I don't think we knew what to ask or to consider. All the complexities of having to become a parent in a non-traditional family where there were absolutely very little support to make it work well. And in the end is why
Mhm,
I chose to be the donor, the egg donor.
mhm, mhm.
And my partner at the time had, birthed the children.
She what now?
She birthed them. In other words, I donated eggs that were fertilized and then they were put.
Oh,
Yeah, that's why they called me the father on the birth certificate. Also
oh.
because there was only room for one mother because of the ways that our system works.
Oh
Yes,
my
and
God.
so well, they didn't even put me on the birth certificate, so we had to go to court to legally get me on the birth certificate. And this
Uh,
is at a time in San Francisco where the person who signed the birth certificate, who was the head of the Department of Public Health at the time, was a lesbian, an out lesbian. And still, not only did they not have a process for putting a second parent who was a mother, or I would imagine if there were two fathers, right?
to
They didn't have
fathers,
that either.
it made no sense.
My first memoir, The Cost of Our Lives, I actually
When did
go
I
into a lot of it there. So
Okay,
that might
okay.
inspire you to go finish that one.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So that's really interesting. How did your family respond? Your mom and dad?
My mom and dad are immigrants from Latin American, from Mexico and Colombia. I don't think they knew what to do on many levels, but I will say that they did everything they could in terms of their capacity to be supportive. I
Mm-hmm,
remember when my partner was pregnant, I specifically had us go down to visit them because I wanted them to see, okay, this is happening.
mm-hmm,
Like they didn't really ask any questions. My father passed away a year after the twins were born,
oh,
and my mother fell into a depression and then ultimately Alzheimer's. So even in that time and in with those struggles, they were always embraced themselves as abuelos, right, as the grandparents. Yeah.
mm-hmm,
And my sister and brother who I was raised with, again, they were very supportive. And ultimately my family in Mexico and Colombia have also been very supportive. Again, people
mm-hmm,
don't ask me questions.
mm-hmm.
But they have welcomed um my family, and I know a lot of people don't have that kind of support.
They don't.
Yep.
Mm-mm. Yeah. So the breakup, it, all breakups are just, there's no good breakup.
My daughter in particular, wanting us to show affection and me realizing I don't want her to think that this is what a loving relationship is.
Hmm. Hmm.
Like that, kids are so sharp.
They are. They see
See it,
everything.
they see everything. And so I could see her trying to fix it. And I thought, no, that's
Hmm.
not your job to fix it. It's our job as
Hmm.
adults to fix that, even though it would be painful, that in the long term, it would be a healthier process for all of us.
Hmm. Hmm. And it turned out that it was.
It did. It did turn out.
Okay.
And for other people who want more, I always say my life is several open books now.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah. They call that the sandwich generation
Yes,
between your
indeed.
kids and your parents.
Yes,
So,
indeed.
mhm.
Absolutely.
In the book, you stated that people wanted to know why you chose mothering instead of parenting. And you may have hit on it when you talked about why you chose the title
Hmm.
Mother and Legacy. But at the same time, talk a little bit about if you see a difference between mothering and parenting.
And it doesn't mean that this is not a parenting book. 100%, I think any gender identity can read this book and learn something. There's an opportunity to learn about how you might want to be as a parent, how
Mhm,
you are as a parent, and also how, like how was it for you to be parented by your parents, right? And
mhm,
what do you consider the legacy, for example? Like what were you really trying to teach your children besides how to tie their shoes and eat with a spoon.
Mhm.
The other thing is that, even with all this alleged progress, like men still, in particular, and obviously in heterosexual relationships, I think they've said, oh, they help out like maybe, 3 to 5% more than they did 25, 30 years ago. And it's still helping out, right? It's not like this is my role. And so I really wanted to call out that women still do so much more of the work, and
Mhm.
that it is taken for granted and assumed, when there is one father, shall we say, in the room. Women do a lot to try to make sure that he's okay. And I don't think that that happens in the same way when there's a mother in the room and there's a lot of men. I think that that is still very much instilled in our society, and there are still so few resources for parents in general, but for mothers, as you're,
Mhm.
100%, single mothers, even less. And so
Mhm.
I just really want to acknowledge and call out that there is not any sense of equality or equity still there, and
Mhm.
that I want to elevate mothers for what we continue to do, that is not paid, that is not valued, and that is not celebrated.
Mhm. So the essay that really caught me was "Spread Your Wings and Don't Die."
Yes.
For me, there was a hint of fatalism in there. Um, like when you say we can't stop death. So talk a little bit about not being able to stop death, particularly with regard to our children. And I think that a lot of people um, take the attitude that you really can't. Because I can remember when my kids were little, people used to say, "Oh, just let them go, let them break their arm," And I'm like, I don't think so. So it's a different style in dealing with um, you know, in dealing with children and coming to terms with what we think we can control versus what we may not be able to control. So I need you to talk a little bit about that.
As parents, right, we want our children to fly, right? There is that quote by Kahil Gibran, I remember, who said, something about like your children are not yours,
Yep.
they are of the
Hmm.
universe. And
Hmm.
so I always remembered that I wanted my children to um be as free as they could in a world that is not
Hmm.
fair, and that is not just, and that is often not safe.
Hmm.
I didn't want them to live in fear, and yet I knew that um, fear had to be part of how, particularly my daughter, protected herself. I was always like, "Be free, but don't get in a car accident. Don't drive when you're buzzed. Like, wear your
Hmm.
bike helmets."
Exactly.
Uh, I mean, they wouldn't wear their bike helmets when they got into high school, and there was an incident with one of them with some, drinking and driving that led to, thank goodness, an accident that did not hurt, them or anybody else, right? In that essay, I talk about one of their friends who
Hmm.
passed away, and actually, in my next book of essays, I talk about another one. Like we know that kids die before their parents sometimes, and so
Hmm.
it's such a difficult balance that we have to say, yeah, don't live in a bubble, right? Like, go
Hmm.
out and scrape your knees, or even,
Hmm.
right, they both have injured their clavicles, and have things have happened, and that's part of, be living a full life, and some of it's just bad luck, right? Like, sometimes it's not even, it just so happens that something happens and you or your child are there, that you have no control over. One thing we know is all of us are born and all of us will die, and that the
Hmm.
date and the time is not known to any of us. And so
Hmm.
I didn't think of it as fatalism as much as just understanding and seeing how the world is, and thinking, how do I give them a sense of spaciousness and yet at the
Mhm.
same time a place of caution. And
Mhm.
I think as parents, it's always that, there we're always right dancing that dance to try
Mhm.
to figure out how to make that work. And then when somebody dies, whether it is somebody, one of their peers or a parent, right? Like you realize all of us have lived through that and will continue to live through that.
Mhm. This is so. Whether or not writing the book was cathartic, and how did your twins respond?
I don't know, as parents, we're just so busy being parents sometimes,
Mhm.
right? That I don't think we allow ourselves or are allowed much time to reflect. I mean, the
Mhm.
one thing that I think is great about being a writer is it does require us to do some reflection.
Mhm.
And I think that as writers, that's part of what we offer the world is that
Yeah.
we dig into things that a lot of people don't want to dig into.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
then, but we sure want to read about other people doing it. Because it really helps us.
It does.
It sure does. As it really helped me to reflect on who I was as a parent and to really dig into those difficult, difficult moments that I didn't want to look at. And yet once I looked at it, it wasn't quite as bad as I thought it might be. And
Mhm.
I was able to learn and to grow and to offer that to other people. And I think that that was really helpful. And I remember when I was reading it to check for those final typos. Of course, a friend just
Mhm.
pointed one out to me the other day, but that I told her there is no book without a typo, at least one.
No.
So I can't
Mm-mm.
worry about it. As I was reading it, I still like felt, emotions come up. I felt
Mhm.
tears. Yeah, I felt proud of that because it told me I was digging into stuff that was not easy and that there still there's probably still some more learning to go.
Mhm.
It's one of those
Mhm.
books like most books that you just never know when to stop. You could go on and
Mhm.
on. Every chapter could have been twice as long. There could have been 50 more
Mhm.
chapters, right? Like at some point you got to just say stop.
Gotta know when to stop. Yeah.
Got to know when to stop. And in terms of my twins, I uploaded the document on Google Docs and I gave them access and I said, please read it. And if there's anything that you're like, I really don't want that in the book, that's not how I remembered it. This is what I
Mhm.
want to say about it. Any
Mhm.
of that. I was completely open and willing to talk that through with them and or to add their voice to the book. Though as I talked about things and as the book kept going forward, I might say something or something might come up and then they would say, "Oh, this is what I remember." And so I would run over and add some more things in because I thought having more of their perspective would
Mhm.
be an important part of the book. Um, but they didn't talk too much. I will say that I gave the book to my daughter, uh,
Mhm.
pretty soon after it came out, and she read it like that.
Mhm.
She sent me a sweet picture of her sitting outside with the book and her cat on her lap. And she sent me a very sweet text that was about a particular chapter, the chapter about when I left the door open and the young man came in while we were watching.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, so she said, Mom, I don't have any bad feelings about that. And I know that
Mhm.
you had the best intentions. And made me feel a lot of tears and a lot of pride for our journey together. And I actually just mailed the book to my son, so we'll see what happens when he gets
Oh,
it.
okay. And being raised by your twins, this is probably the best one to end with
Yes, it
too.
is. See, you're
Yeah.
just a natural
Yeah.
entrepreneur and writer.
Yeah. Can you say more about what things they taught you?
So much. Um, they retaught me in a way, like how to have fun and to be playful and silly. Like the idea that quit acting like a child has to be a negative thing. Like that, I think
Mhm.
the joy and the adventureness,
Adventurousness.
adventurousness. Thank you, writer. Adventurousness. Uh, they were not the children that let me sit on the bench. They were always like, "Come climb the rope thingy with me.
Mhm,
Come do,
mhm,
they always wanted me to engage in their activities. So when we would go to a water park, I was going down all the slides with them. So they just
mhm,
reminded me that this idea of what's child's play and
mhm.
what's adult play is just another lie.
It is.
Like that if we did more of what kids do, I think we would be happier and probably
Mhm,
more fit. They taught me how to take responsibility for the fact that being an adult does not mean I'm perfect.
mhm,
And so they gave me a lot of good opportunities to learn how to apologize and with sincerity.
mhm,
And that was a really important lesson to say that despite all our good intentions, we all
mhm,
make mistakes no matter how young or how old we are, and
mhm,
that we have to be willing to take responsibility and to always keep learning, on some level, like reparations, right? Like
mhm,
how do we make this better? Like how do I learn from this situation? I think the other thing that they uh taught me was to stand my ground as a parent
mhm. What do you
because they
mean?
were they were very persuasive and they had a lot of ideas about what I should and should not be doing as a parent.
Oh.
And there was a point where I talk about my son comments on something and I say, "Yes, we're the league of ridiculous parents," right? Like
Mhm,
we're the parents who
mhm.
want to meet the people that whose house you're going to be in, right?
Exactly. Yeah,
No,
yeah,
they
I
were
heard
raised in a very kind of progressive, fairly white a community in Berkeley, California, and a lot of the parents that when they would go to their houses, they were just like, "Just drop me off," and I said, "Oh no, that's not going to happen.
it.
Nope,
Mhm,
I'm going to
mhm,
go and I'm going to meet who is going to be with my
mhm.
children," right? And so
Exactly.
that what I was doing was the right thing for me to do as a parent,
Mhm,
and in fact, it was the right thing you know, to do for them. And so I think they also taught me
mhm,
when to release and let go and say it's not that big a deal, and when it was important to
mhm.
stand my ground and say, nope, this is how I'm going to do it.
Yeah. Well, that's great. That is so great.
So let me just say thank you so much for
Okay.
doing this with me. It was a pleasure, and I'm so grateful for you to be my reader. I always say you're the person I wrote the book for. So
Oh, wonderful.
you
That's
know,
great.
yeah.